All right, welcome back. This is going to be a very short lecture video, but I wanted to cover the types of skeletal muscle fibers, and when we're talking about fast twitch and slow twitch, oxidative, glycolytic, let's just analyze some of these different fiber types and how they're used in the muscles. So first of all, we want to look at the muscle contraction type as there's sort of, we can look at it as power, how powerful is it, how quickly is it happening, or the speed, and then how long is the contraction happening. So the power of a muscle contraction really is going to be very related to the size of the muscle. The larger the muscle fibers, the stronger the contraction. Now for speed and duration, we look at that in two different types. So we have fast twitch fibers and we have slow twitch fibers. And the fast twitch are, as they sound, the name, they're going to be faster. They're also going to be stronger, but they're going to be shorter in length. The slow twitch are going to be slower, however, they're going to be a longer lasting contraction. Now, what makes these fast or slow has to do with the type of ATPase enzyme or protein that's in that muscle fiber. Now, an ATPase, ACE means enzyme, that is the enzyme that's going to hydrolyze the ATP molecule into ADP and inorganic phosphate. And if you think back to last week when we talked about the physiology of muscle tissue, so how does the actual sarcomere shortening happen? For remember, it required ATP, right? And it requires the hydrolysis of ATP in order for that myosin head to release from the actin, right? And then the contraction can happen again and again. So in other words, this particular enzyme is required in order for a muscle to continue to contract. So if this enzyme works faster, right, then we can have faster contraction of the muscles. If the ATPase is slower, we're going to have slower contractions. In the fast twitch fibers, it's not just the ATPase enzyme that acts faster. It's also that the actual action potential that is propagated, so along the muscle cell through the T-tubules, that propagation actually also happens more quickly. So we mentioned about the ATPase enzyme, that it can be fast or slow. But in this slide, we're going to talk about the actual ATP, the energy, how is that supplied by the muscle fiber? So there's really two different ways that ATP can be supplied. And so the first, look at the right of the slide with me first. So glycolysis is a process that happens, and it happens in the sarcoplasm of a muscle fiber. So if we're talking about another cell, it would just be in the cytoplasm, okay? And what this process does, there's many enzymes involved. It's a multi-step process, but essentially it takes glucose, which is a sugar, right? And it gradually breaks down or oxidizes glucose into something called pyruvate. In doing that, it produces two molecules of ATP. Okay, now notice this is quicker than the alternative process. Okay, glycolysis. The alternative process, which is a longer process, is called aerobic respiration. And aerobic, you can always think of as meaning it requires oxygen, right? So without oxygen, this process doesn't happen. Now, glycolysis just occurred in the sarcoplasm, but for aerobic respiration to occur, it occurs within the mitochondria. So if muscle fibers are carrying out aerobic respiration, we need lots of mitochondria for this to happen, okay? Again, if glycolysis was a multi-step process, this is many more steps. So it's going to take longer to generate ATP this way. However, we get lots and lots more ATP generated than we would through glycolysis alone. Okay? Glycolysis is actually sort of the beginning step of this aerobic respiration, but we continue on through many steps and we require oxygen. So for one molecule of glucose, we get about 34 ATPs as compared to 2, okay, for glycolysis. And it's going to vary how much ATP we get depending on what the nutrient source is, right? So for some fatty acids, we may get over 100 ATPs generated for a particular fatty acid, okay? So now that you know there's different ways ATP can be generated, let's look at the type of muscle fibers that exist. So we have oxidative fibers, so oxygen, right? We know that aerobic respiration requires oxygen. So these are, in fact, those that are produced by aerobic respiration. These are sometimes called red fibers because they actually appear red when you're looking at them under the microscope. They appear red because these fibers have more capillaries, they have a lot of mitochondria, they have a lot of myoglobin. It's that protein that helps to store oxygen. These are fatigue resistant because we have a lot, right, of ATP we can generate, but it takes time, okay? Glycolytic fibers are those that, as it sounds, produce the ATP primarily with glycolysis only. And because they're not going through the aerobic respiration process, they don't have as many mitochondria, capillaries, or myoglobin protein. So these are white fibers because it is the presence, right, of the myoglobin, the mitochondria, and the capillaries that make them look red. So if we have less of that, they're going to appear more white. Now, these are fatigable because we have a store, right, of glucose, and we only get 2 ATPs. So even though it's generated quickly, we may run out, right, of the glucose that it takes for us to produce ATP before so we may not be able to generate ATP fast enough. So these are what we call fatigable. All right, so the type of fibers we have, okay, when we're combining either fast or slow twitch plus the type of oxidative or the type of ATP, whether it's oxidative or glycolytic, we can have slow oxidative, right? So those are the slow twitch where the ATP is created by aerobic respiration. We can have fast oxidative, so we have the fast twitch, ATP created by aerobic respiration. Or we can have the fast glycolytic. So we have fast twitch, where we have glycolysis as our form that produces the ATP. Okay, now let's sort of do an overview or a summary of everything we've talked about and how this all comes together and understanding in our muscles. So let's fill in this table. I think it will help us. So if we think about, so we have our 3 types, slow oxidative, fast oxidative, and fast glycolytic. When we look at the strength, how strong the contraction will be, okay, if we just say more or less is going to be our gauge, right? Our slow oxidative fibers are going to be less powerful, okay? Whereas our fast fibers, whether we're talking about oxidative or glycolytic, are going to be more, right? Those fast twitch fibers typically are going to have a stronger contraction. Now, the ATPase, remember that's that enzyme we mentioned that breaks down, that hydrolyzes the ATP into ADP and PI, which is necessary, right, in the contraction. So the slow oxidative fibers, they're named slow, right, because they are slower to hydrolyze ATP. So that's supposed to be an S right there, sorry. So this one is slow. These are named fast because of the rate at which the ATPase works. So these would both be fast. Now, the ability to make ATP. So we're talking about either glycolysis or aerobic respiration, right? And we're talking about, so we'll number them, the fastest or the highest amount of ATP, the highest to the lowest amount of ATP. Okay, 1 would be the highest, 3 would be the lowest. So our ability to make ATP, okay, our slow oxidative fibers actually have the highest ability. Our fast oxidative fibers have the next highest ability, and our fast glycolytic fibers have less or lower ability. Now remember, that's not how quickly it's generating the ATP, that's the ability to make it. And remember that with aerobic respiration, for every glucose, we're making about 34 ATP, whereas in glycolytic fibers, we're making about 2 ATP for every glucose. All right, fatigue resistance. So which number one would be those that have the highest resistance to fatigue, right? They're not as fatigable. So think about that. What do you think? Well, it makes sense, right, that the slow ones, when we talked about, they may be slower. However, part of the benefit to that is they don't fatigue as quickly, right? So again, we're going to have these go in order. Our oxidative fibers that can create more ATP are going to fatigue. They're going to be less likely to fatigue, whereas the glycolytic, they make ATP quickly, right? But they're going to fatigue. All right, now the mitochondria. Remember we said, okay, if it's an aerobic respiration, if that's the way they make ATP, then they need lots of mitochondria to do that. So the pardon me, the oxidative fibers are those that are using aerobic respiration. So this would be a lot, right? Both of these. Whereas our glycolytic, they don't need as many mitochondria. They're making it in the sarcoplasm. This is going to be, myoglobin is also going to be related to, because myoglobin stores oxygen. So this is related to aerobic. Those fibers that have aerobic respiration need more oxygen. And so if we number these, the slow oxidative are going to have the highest, and then we have fast, and finally our fast glycolytic. Now, if we sum all of this up and we think about, okay, knowing what we know about these 3 types of fibers, what kinds of activities would muscles do that are, let's start with slow oxidative. So these, it's not as strong of a contraction, right? We don't break down our ATP as quickly. However, we have a lot of ability to make ATP. We don't fatigue it takes a lot for these to fatigue. We have a lot of mitochondria. We have a lot of myoglobin. So these are going to be like your endurance muscles, right? So if I'm going to think about just every day, the muscles that it takes for you just to have your normal posture, they're working all the time, right? They don't need to have powerful contractions, but they are working consistently. Okay. Now let's move to the fast oxidative fibers. Okay. These have a more powerful contraction than our slow oxidative. Their ATPase is faster. However, they fatigue a little bit quicker. Okay. These are going to be those for like longer duration or medium. I'll put medium duration. So let's say I'm going for a long walk, right? Or I'm going for a long, slow biking trip. Those are the things that I will use those fast oxidative fibers for. Now our glycolytic, what do we see? They're fast, they're strong. However, they're going to fatigue quicker. So these are for powerful, right? Intense movements. So obviously if you're at the gym, right, you're going to lift heavy weights. Or if you're going to sprint very quickly, okay? These are the kinds of things. But just at home, let's say like I have something very heavy, right, that I'm carrying in from the grocery trip. When I might need to use some of those fast glycolytic fibers to pick that up. Okay, that's the end of this short little lecture video. As always, reach out to me with any questions.